Former Homeland Security Advisor to George W. Bush, Fran Townsend, is here with us now. Fran, thanks so much for joining us. As we start to learn more about the suspect, where's the investigation at right now?
So we now know that they've identified the individual. We also know that they took guns, fake grenades out of the car. So the first thing they're going to do is trace those guns, run his name through databases. We understand that he was not known to French intelligence. We don't believe he traveled to the United States, but they will share this information, particularly with 2 American victims now. The FBI has opened up a counterterrorism investigation. All U.S. intelligence is available, and so we'll look to see, did we have any indication, what do we know about this individual, the network he may have been a part of, his communications, his cell phone, what can you find out to identify whether or not and what contacts he has with any terrorist group.
Fran, just days ago, the director of internal security in France lamented out loud that he was worried that some of the things we were focusing on, just not in France but around the world, security issues, that ISIS and other terror groups were evolving beyond those security precautions. What's your reaction when you see a truck being used as a weapon of terror?
Look, for here in America, for Americans, it reminds us going back to the Oklahoma City bombing, right, where you saw a big panel truck used to blow up a building. I think the most terrifying thing about it, Vlad, is it reminds Americans that a common object, when you see in Orlando, we can talk about what U.S. policy on guns is.
Right.
You can't talk about what's the policy on trucks and cars, right? We can't take those away from people. And so the ubiquity of a car and the ubiquity of being at a large public gathering to celebrate a national holiday, you understand the pressure on law enforcement and intelligence to try and identify the threat long before the day of the attack. And if you can't do that, it's very difficult to actually prevent the attack. Now, this individual was not known to French intelligence, and so he had a petty criminal record, a local petty criminal record, no indication yet, at least, that you could have predicted he would have taken this step. And so it's a real challenge for law enforcement when ISIS as a group, or these terror groups, people are self-radicalized, they self-initiate, there's no central command where you might be able to intercept a communication. It's a real challenge.
So would you consider this an intelligence failure?
No, I don't. I don't think, nothing that we know so far would suggest to me that that was an intelligence failure. I think it points out the challenge going forward to try and stop these things.
Fran, from the reporting that we here at CBS News have done over the past couple of months with regards to some of these terror attacks in Europe, there's a lot of concern about the open borders, the Schengen agreements that allow people to travel freely between European countries. There are a lot of people that are worried that this is one of the reasons things like this keep happening with such frequency in Europe and France in particular. Is that something now that officials should be looking at, perhaps not doing away with it, because that is one of the beauties of the European Union, but perhaps being a little bit more stringent?
It's interesting. Just this morning, we've seen reports that the Germans have increased security on their French border. And I do think you're going to see folks at border control points being particularly, whether or not they do away with Schengen, I think you're going to see increased security measures at border control points. It's just a natural thing. Look, in Western Europe, they've also suffered from this flow of foreign fighters in a way that gratefully the United States has not had to deal with. They have more foreign fighters transiting through Western Europe, which is a real vulnerability. Now, we don't know. This guy was of Tunisian descent, but was legitimately in France with legal papers. We don't know what his background was. We don't know what his travel is. But I do think it's worth pointing out this flow of foreign fighters in Western Europe is a particular vulnerability for our allies in Western Europe.
And in fact, one of the things that Claude Monique, a former French intelligence official, told us is when you see even some of the weapons used, for example, in the November attack, that is also facilitated by these open borders. France has very strict gun control laws. A lot of people here talk about, well, it doesn't work because you saw what happened in November, but it's not necessarily because the laws aren't strict. It's because they're just able to move and traffic those arms freely through borders.
That's right. I mean, this guy in Nice had a handgun and we're told an assault rifle. And so very unusual in France. Now, there were conflicting reports. The initial reports were that he had exchanged gunfire with police. Hearing from law enforcement sources now that that's not the case. Right. But those are all clues. Those weapons can be traced, and you can begin to understand the very weapon flows you're talking about.
Now, nobody has claimed responsibility, but we do know that ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they've been calling for attacks like this? Use anything, a knife, a truck. Right. So what's the key to preventing something else like this happening?
Well, it's very hard, right? You're going to need, I mean, I think Secretary Clinton has called for what she calls an intelligence surge. I certainly think you need more resources put against intelligence and law enforcement. But I must tell you, the clues, at least the ones we know about now related to this attacker, were very sparse, and even with all the intelligence and law enforcement resources in the world, not clear yet that there was enough for them to identify him before the attack.
It's just, and Fran, when you just personally, when you see what's happened in France, you see what's happened in Orlando, in San Bernardino, in Baghdad, in Istanbul, what are your thoughts about, are we seeing, so Secretary Clinton wants an intelligence surge. Are we seeing a terrorist surge across the world?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is this sort of fracturing of this terror movement from a hierarchical, sort of more centralized Al-Qaeda core model into this decentralized, which is much more difficult to combat for authorities, right? It's difficult for you to interrupt the cycle of violence. It's difficult for you to identify individual perpetrators before they move. And when they're going against soft targets in free and open societies, they have a distinct advantage. You add to that their willingness to die, and the cards are stacked against law enforcement officials and intelligence officials. That said, I think we have to look at attacking the ideology, because in the end, that's the thing that is the oxygen that keeps this thing moving. That's confounded the Bush administration, it confounded the Obama administration. This defeating the ideology is really hard, but it's a place where our Arab allies can be really effective partners in terms of pushing back that this is not consistent with the tenets of Islam, that they're using Islam for sort of a nefarious purpose.
And just on that point, Fran, before we let you go, does that mean then when we start to see these kind of lone wolf attacks, these individualized attacks inspired by or directed by terror groups, that it means that we've got them at their heels in places like in Syria and Iraq?
I don't think I know that this is a favorite line of the administration.
Yeah, that's why I'm curious to get your take on it.
I don't think that's what, John Brennan, the director of CIA, recently testified before Congress and said, look, this is part of these attacks around the world are part of kind of their objective. And so it's good that we're trying to deny them safe haven, and we're attacking their safe haven in Iraq and Syria. Don't get me wrong, and we should continue to do that and have success at that. But it doesn't mean one is necessarily related to the other. You are going to continue to see this. They've been using social media to radicalize and call people to their movement. And so I'm not sure that I think winning in one place is going to stop the other.
All right, Fran Townsend, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.